Today, people see weakness as something abhorrent. Hence, we have no room for vulnerability. And yet, vulnerability has been the key to unlocking our potentials, because when you acknowledge your weaknesses, you create room for the divine to work. My name is Father Dom Ori. I welcome you to this episode called Your Weakness. There is an ever-growing disdain for embracing weakness in our world today, isn't it? It tells us that we are still living in a human world, not an utopian world where everything seems to be perfect. Weakness is seen to be vulnerability. And trust me, no one wants to be vulnerable because it is seen as a sign of weakness. We all want that perfect look, the perfect career, the perfect reputation, the perfect job, the perfect marriage, the perfect family. But life isn't that way, is it? We want to let everyone know that we are winning in each and every area of our lives. But the truth is that no one is winning in every area of their life. But we don't want anyone to see that because we don't want them to see our weakness. This could be our shadow self in court with our persona. And so we hide all the areas we don't want people to see and present to them all the areas we want them to see. Your shadow self is the self you don't want people to see. And your persona is the self that you project to the world to see. We all have them, and we all struggle with them. It's a dirty struggle. The truth is, if we are unaware of their influences in our lives, we will keep living and glorying in our false self. To become aware of living in your false self needs a bit of dying in you. Yes, a bit of dying, which in a way means becoming vulnerable to acknowledge your weaknesses, that you have been off kilter in your life. And now things need to change if you are going to build your house on a solid rock, like Jesus said. If you are like me growing up, you were meant to believe the lie of winning and climbing up the ladder, because that would be an evidence of being successful in your life. And when you're successful, they said, you're fulfilled and you're happy. We believe that lie, and hence we spend our life building our house on shallow ground, thinking it's a solid rock. And then the storms of life hit us, and then we realize we don't have any foundation. I believe Jesus wants to set us free from all of that. In the Gospel of Mark, as Jesus and his disciples made their way through Galilee, he began to tell his disciples that he's going to suffer and die an excruciating death. But after 3 days, he will rise again. This was a sacred moment. You would say that Jesus was opening his heart to his disciples who have accompanied him all this time, sharing his fear and being vulnerable at that time. And yet, in this sacred, holy moment, the disciples didn't get it, because as the Bible said, they were busy arguing who is greater among them. Yeah. Do you see how shallow and off-kilter they were? This is why Jesus sat down, called them together, and began to tell them, if any one of you wants to be the first, he must make himself last of all and servant of all. He then picked up a little child and placed the child at the center and said, anyone who welcomes any of these children in my name welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. You see, this was a counterintuitive thing for them to hear. Because for the disciples, they grew up in a very hierarchical world where everyone knows where they are placed in the social hierarchy. Men and women, masters and slaves, and then children. Completely different to our world today. That was supposed to be a joke because I'm being sarcastic. In those times, children were not even recognized because they were in the lowest social order. But then Jesus places a child at the center of the crowd and said, this is the way to go. By becoming as least as this little child here, Jesus told them that if any one of them wants to be the first, that they have to be the least and servant of all. You realize what Jesus is saying here. If you want to be the first, you have to be the last. This is called the upside down paradox. And it is something that doesn't make sense in our world today because we are swimming in this ocean of conventional wisdom, not Christ's wisdom. We like to define things by our own terms, but that's not the way to go. This is why we spend our entire life trying to get it all, to win it all. We do so by tearing people down who gets on our way so that we could win at all cost. We don't understand failure, and we don't even understand weakness. The language we speak and understand are the language of ranking, grasping, propping ourselves up, clinging and climbing, winning and tearing people down. We get caught up in these because they are the energy of the system that we are part of. We have been trying to get to the top without knowing that what we are looking for at the top is already down here at the bottom. St. Francis said that he has no need of getting to the top that is full of people who know it all and think they have it all. He just wants to be at the bottom. We are all the people that he needed. The poor, the vulnerable, the weak. That's where all of them are. This is where I could serve, he said, because that's where I am needed. You see, the two sons of Zebedee that I talked about, they wanted to be one on the right hand and one on the left hand of Jesus in his kingdom. They thought that by following Jesus, they could secure their position of being his lieutenants in the world to come. They just wanted to get to the top at all costs, thinking that that was all the evidence that they need to say that they have won in life. We dread going this downward road of weakness, especially when we have spent our entire life building our way up the ladder. That is why we feel sadness in our hearts, because we never get to the fullness of life. All our achievements, they all fall apart because there was no good foundation to begin with. St. Paul totally gets it when he said in his second letter to the Corinthians, "For Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." In the Message translation, it says, "And so the weaker I get, the stronger I become," which really rhymes so much. So if you get this, you know that weak is the new strong, as wonderfully said by Robert. Have you ever felt weakness in the face of something you couldn't control? Have you ever felt your leastness, littleness, lostness, unworthiness, not enoughness, if that's a word, in the face of something? Yeah, it's always painful. Sometimes you compare yourself to other people, wishing you had their life and their job, their kind of family. You refuse to acknowledge your weakness. But by the way, comparison and wishing you had somebody else's life is lethal and very dangerous. It could only lead you to misery and envy and all the horrible feelings that comes with it. And we know all of those feelings, don't we? I remember in my first year as a priest, I will look at all these other priests who, by my own standard, they were just killing it out there, doing great things. And I will feel this sense of weakness and some kind of wishing that I had that kind of breaks. That I keep saying to myself and thinking that I'm not good enough because I don't get to do what they're doing. For me, they're like winning in life. They're winning as a priest, but I'm not. For me, it was the feeling that I'm not good enough or trapped in my own negative thoughts. Having that feeling of weakness, that I'm powerless because I feel like I'm not measuring up by their standard or the standards that may be, was something very lethal. It was precisely at that time that I heard a voice speak to me. We all know that voice. The voice that speaks truth in our heart, the inner Christ wisdom in us. I heard somebody say, God is not playing that game. God is not into those kind of games. You know the game of trying to prove ourselves, feeling sorry that we don't have what they have. We don't have their breaks, as if that is something. The game of propping ourselves up, climbing, winning, and it changed everything for me. So when I read lines like the one written by St. Paul in his first letter to the Corinthians, that God's weakness is stronger than human strength, it tells me that in many ways that we admire being in control, self-sufficient, and being self-made, God is not into that. God is into the business of using people who are able to let go of their control and self-sufficiency so that they could experience God's power working through them. They move from being oriented to autonomy to mutuality. And let's be honest, that appears as being weak. When observed by our human eyes, it does appear to be weak. It makes sense that God chooses what is weak to shame the strong, because only those who allow themselves to be touched by God get to experience this divine strength that they are not aware of before. Think of all those in the 12 Steps program who began by acknowledging their powerlessness. For it is at the time that they are ready to say, I don't have any power. I've come to the end of my life. I've come to the end of myself. That is when their journey of divine strength begins. As St. Paul says, God's grace becomes manifest in our weakness, because God is not into the game of us trying to prove ourselves. We know all the ways. We do know all the ways in which we try to prove ourselves, as if that earns us some extra points before God. Whether you feel weakness in your life or you feel you've got nothing to offer, the good news is that God chooses the weak things of this world to shame the strong. That is why it's called the gospel. Of course, because it announces the good news that in your confused, not knowing what you're doing, in your morally bedraggled state, in all the ways we feel we have messed up in life, all the ways we don't measure up enough, we are not good enough, we are not qualified enough for whatever we are doing in life, that we are weak, God comes to us precisely at those moments to announce the good news. I am on your side. And what better good news is that? How great is that line? God chooses the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chooses the lonely things of this world, the things that are not good in the standard of the world, to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before God. Think of all the moments in your life, that have greatly shaped who you are. They're not always the moments that you won, the moments you bought a car or a house or a bigger boat. They are always those moments that you lost. You lost somebody or you lost something. You found yourself falling flat on your face and you came to the end of yourself, at the end of your rope, and you have your plan blown up in your face and you hit rock bottom. Those are the moments that change the trajectory of your life and many times wakes you up to life. They are the moments we have no power in ourselves, that we feel powerless and weak. Those are the moments that forces us to open ourselves up to the power that is beyond us. As if that when we feel weak, God is using our vulnerability, our weakness, to reveal His divine power in us. It's as if that when we feel weak, we are vulnerable. And that is when the divine shows up in our life and asks, are you ready to get started on your journey of transformation? In those moments, our response is always yes, 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 of course I'm ready, because we have come to the end of our own power and strength. We are now open to be used by the divine power at work within us. You see, the beauty of your weakness is that you get to understand what it means for somebody else who might feel that way in their life. Often, it is the losers that always guess it. Those who have been on the receiving end of injustice always knows how to stand up for injustice. It is when the system hasn't favored you that you always look for a better kind of system that will favor you. It is often those who are least marginalized and unpopular that always understand the power of a message that is inclusive to anyone that has been kicked to the edges. It is often the marginalized and excluded. They are the first to understand the power of a message that embraces and loves all those that have not been included. Do you see the power of this message? Do you feel it in your heart? The truth is, if the system has favored you and you are climbing the ladder, you wouldn't make sense of wisdom and a message that challenges the ladder because it works for you. But if the system hasn't favored you, in fact, it puts its boot on your neck, and you have not flourished in a system that says wealth and fame are what matters, you will be open for an alternative system that is for everyone who hasn't received those things and are not playing that game. This is the power of the good news of a God who chooses what is weak to shame the strong. A God who wants to use those who have felt the test of being at the end of their rope. They have felt the pinch of life to give hope and light to anyone, anywhere who feels that they have come to the end of themselves. God understands our weakness firsthand. And that is why God wants to use us because, not in spite, because of our weakness. In the Message translation of the letter to the Hebrews, it says, we don't have a high priest, Jesus Christ, who is out of touch with our reality. He's been through weakness and testing, experienced it all but sin. So let's walk right up to Him and get what He is so ready to give. Take mercy, accept help. This is something that is not foreign to St. Paul, who once persecuted Christians, but now has the privilege of preaching the good news. He received mercy and love from God, who is full of love and mercy. And now he is unstoppable. In many ways, his weakness and unworthiness came to the forefront of being used by God. And he could say, the weaker I get, the stronger I become. God's grace is enough for me. And God's strength becomes manifest in my weakness. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And may this, my dear brothers and sisters, be your prayer in moments of weakness. Amen.